I just want to say good afternoon and thank you all very much for joining our second BN Mentorship Network event. We're very excited to have you all here with us today and excited to continue to support recipients of the Bursary for Internationally Educated Nurses program, as many of you know as BN. So thank you very much for being here today. Now, lastly, in developing this BN mentorship network, one of our main goals at RhPAP was just to share information and really share opportunities for BN recipients that you may find helpful to complete your bridging training and transition into the rural employment part of your return and service agreements. So that being said, we are very excited to have a guest speaker with us today and to welcome Holly Crowe, who is the IEN Navigator with the Alberta Association of Nurses. So Holly has a very strong background in supporting IENs throughout her career, and she'll be speaking about various resources that you can find through the Association of Nursing. That could include employment resources, licensing guidance for RNs and LPNs, and advice for IENs as you finish your bridging training and transition into the rural workforce. So we do have a lot to cover. I'm going to end my shared screen here. Holly, thank you very much for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. So as she mentioned, really quickly, short bio of myself to explain a little bit of that background that Lindsay referenced. I've been in the IEN Navigator role now with the Alberta Association of Nurses for about 3.5 months. But prior to that, I spent the last 12 years teaching in the Bridge to Canadian Nursing program at Mount Royal University. Prior to that, I was working with the Bachelor of Nursing program, have some leadership and management experience with Alberta Health Services, and my clinical background is in pediatric ICU and emergency nursing. So this role that I'm in now ties in all of that experience and a very large network that I've built over almost 30 years of practice here in Alberta. And it's coming in handy as I, try to build that network, expand upon it, and to try and support the IENs with this transition to practice from every step of the process. So that's just a little bit about me. I will open our session with a land acknowledgement. Just gonna move my screen here so I can see my notes a little bit better. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, the Alberta Association of Nurses acknowledge that we are able to live, work, and play across what is known as the province of Alberta because of the generosity of the Indigenous nations. Recognizing that I am presenting to an audience situated across Alberta, it is imperative that I acknowledge I am presenting from what is currently known as Calgary, which is situated on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. We acknowledge that we are living on the traditional lands of the First Nations Treaties 6, 7, and 8, the Inuit people, and the historical Northwest Métis regions of whose footsteps have marked and cared for these lands since time immemorial. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. I wrote this acknowledgement to help to continue to uncover the truth and seek understanding in Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing my work. One of the things I like to start with here is talking about the differences in the organizations that are related to or representing nursing. So here in Alberta, there's several organizations working with or for nursing. It's necessary to distinguish the differences in each organization and why it is important to your career as a nurse in Alberta. Each have a different purpose and function and a different audience, which makes the distinction between them easier to understand. I'm just going to touch on the regulators and the association because those are the two that get confused the most. So the regulator is also referred to the college, and this is the organization that is responsible for licensing registered nurses and nurse practitioners in Alberta. The regulator manages all of the functions related to nursing licensing, setting practice, conduct, and ethical standards. They create and maintain continuing competence requirements. And finally, they address complaints from the public or the employers or colleagues through an established process. The purpose of the CRNA is to protect the public. The three nursing regulatory bodies related to nursing in Alberta are the College of Registered Nurses of Alberta, the College of Licensed Practical Nurses of Alberta, and the College of Registered Psychiatric Nurses of Alberta. It is extremely important to understand your responsibilities as a nurse and to ensure that you're always practicing under the guidelines of your particular license. And I say this specifically because many IENs actually hold both an LPN and an RN practice license. The purpose of the AAN came about in May 2022 following legislation changes that caused us to separate from our regulators. The purpose of the association is to enhance, promote, and advocate for all nursing professions. We do this by engaging with our members to understand what issues are most important for them. We advocate and promote the interests of nurses and nursing as a profession, both to the government as well as to the public. The association connects members and provides services, supports, and resources to help members achieve professional excellence. We offer professional development opportunities and activities, provide opportunities for networking and social events. We host nursing recognition awards and advance the nursing profession. The AAN works collaboratively with all regulatory bodies, unions, the Government of Alberta, other associations, and nursing interest groups, all to support and advance Alberta nurses and our profession. My role as the IEN Navigator is to support any nurse who's taken their education outside of Canada. I interact directly with IENs who contact me by phone or by email, and they may already reside here in Alberta, across Canada, and globally overseas. I answer questions and provide advice and support on a variety of topics. My role is intended to support IENs either domestically or globally with registration, employment, immigration, settlement, funding support, and education resources. I work with partner organizations and stakeholders across the province and across Canada to support the transition of the IEN to nursing in Canada and specifically in Alberta. I do collect some data on the audience that I'm interacting with, and I try to identify bottlenecks in entry to practice and to use this information to provide recommendations on how to improve the process. You can find a link on the IEN resource page of the Alberta Association of Nurses website with my email. These are just some of the organizations that I partner with to support IENs. I honestly could have turned this into, this looks busy enough as it is, but I could have turned this into a really crazy page because the number of people and organizations I'm interacting with now is absolutely gigantic. So this includes regulators, government, employers, post-secondary institutions, cultural organizations, professional associations, settlement agencies, and other educational support services. I'm also involved with research groups across the country and have recently started advocating within the government using the AAN support, where we met last week with the Minister of Immigration and Settlement Services. The Navigator program has a huge network of stakeholders who support the transition of the IEN to nursing in Canada, and we can offer tools to help IENs reach their professional best. To learn a bit more about the association or our member benefits, you can look at albertanursing.ca, and all of the links are embedded there. Okay, I wonder, I can't really see anybody, but I'm wondering if we have any LPNs on the call or anyone interested in the LPN regulations. I'm not sure if, Lindsay, if people put their hand up or.
Yeah, or if anyone wants to throw in the chat, maybe whether they're pursuing RN or LPN, that would be helpful.
Sure. I'm going to start talking about the RN registration process first. And then when we get to the LPN piece, if there are no LPNs or no one interested in that process, I can skip over that section. The processes are very similar to each other and require multi-steps to complete the applications. It's just with two different regulators that you're working through the steps. So as I mentioned, we have 3 regulators in our province right now for nursing, our CRNA, CLPNA, and CRPNA. There are many steps that you'll need to review, including previous education, previous work experience, your English language proficiency, proof of identity, criminal record checks, et cetera, et cetera. You might be required to submit documents such as an education credential assessment or an NNAS report, and proof of registration from your National Nursing Council or regulator. This is usually, it's good to get a lot of these documents ready before you come to Canada. And if anybody is sort of in this process, you might notice, how hard it is to access documents from overseas. And so I always recommend that people start this process early, that they start to gather their documents early. And it takes time to go through the process of credentialing your education and work experience. And so you really need to start organizing those documents early and begin the application process for registration early as well. So to apply for an RN license in Alberta, there's a few documents you need to submit. For CRNA, there are actually different application streams, and the one that's specific to internationally educated nurses is the substantial equivalence application. This is specific for IENs, and if you are an RN from another province in Canada and you would like to move to Alberta or move from Alberta to another province, we have what's called portability, and the application stream for those nursing license applications is the equivalent jurisdiction pathway. So they are 2 different pathways requiring very different documents. And so it's important to know the difference between those 2 types of application processes. Within the application page, there is an information booklet and it outlines the steps for registration. I highly recommend printing this booklet out, no matter which stream you're in, and follow along and check off the items as you complete that work. Each step of the process leads you to the next step, and so you must follow those steps in order. The 2 biggest pieces of the application process for your license is step 2 and step 3, the confirming competency and demonstrating eligibility sections. After you create your account, you do start with a CRNA pathway guide, which I'm going to click on next. I'm not going to go through each of these, but because each internationally educated nurse comes with such different education experience and global licensing histories, there's different pathways that they've tried to create for each kind of unique situation. The pathway guide is on the CRNA website, and it will ask you questions to help select the pathway that best suits your situation. Next, you're going to be required to attest to questions on your application confirming you meet the English language proficiency requirements. There are different standards that are included in the attestation of your English language proficiency. Many of you will know CELBAN or IELTS language testing, and there are required minimum scores that you have for those actual tests themselves, or completing education programs in English or working in English over the last few years. So again, there's different ways you can meet your English language proficiency. Now they ask for an attestation that you have met that, and that means basically you are guaranteeing that your answers are true and that you have met that proficiency expectation. Currency of practice, this is the piece that's actually been really a moving target over the last 2 years, and which has probably been the most disruptive for IENs in Alberta in terms of accessing permits and permits to practice. So currently, as of October 1st, you will meet the currency of practice requirement if you've completed one of the following items on this list. Now, I understand most of you are in bridging programs at the moment, and so that's how you're meeting your currency of practice for this practice year. There are additional requirements and testaments required on your application form for your RN license, and because you're attesting to these truths, the documents must be completed by you and only you. They've discovered that third-party usage has increased over the last year and a half, causing quite a bit of problems with these documents not being completed by the person who's applying for the license. If you use a third party for your application completion, you are at risk for denial of your application or loss of your CRNA license. And so it is really important that everybody who completes a CRNA application completes that document themselves so that you are personally making your attestations about your practice yourself. Okay, finally here we've got the jurisprudence course, apologies, and the Protecting Patients from Sexual Abuse and Misconduct course. These are courses that are embedded within the CRNA website. You are prompted to complete them if you have not done it already, with embedded links in the application process. And then once you've completed those once, they do get filed under your electronic file and you don't need to do them again. And one of the very last steps is purchasing liability protection. As nurses in Canada, we have a responsibility to purchase our own insurance and liability protection for our practice above what our hospital or employer may actually have for us. And so you'll have to click on that link directly in the application step for your CNPS liability protection and purchase it that way. Now, the Alberta Association of Nurses membership is a voluntary membership. It is not required at this time, but it does offer some benefits. And so one of those benefits is that if you have an AAN membership, you will save a little bit of money on your liability protection. And I think it's around $10 or $20 that it saves you from that annual liability fee. As well as you can have with the AAN membership, it actually gives you some access to other cost savings from different businesses, including some insurance companies that we're now partnered with. So it's something to think about. And again, back to one of my beginning slides there, talking about the Alberta Association itself is a professional association representing nursing and providing professional development, advocacy, and information to support nursing in Alberta. If you don't meet the requirements from CRNA, you'll need to speak with a nurse consultant to discuss your options. So you will need to make sure that you get in contact with them to follow up on what are the issues with your license and what maybe needs to be done in order to complete that registration process. Lindsay, did you see if we have any LPNs or anyone wanting to hear about the LPN process?
Yeah, we do have a few comments in the chat, 3 or 4 saying yes, they're an LPN alignment.
Sure.
So
yeah. Okay. So we'll touch on them quickly. It's a very similar process, although through an entirely different website. You'll need to sign into the CLPNA website to access that registration process. And they do also have an internationally educated nurse pathway for application. The NNAS reports were something that were heavily relied on for many, many years in the past. And I think we've found that the NNAS system is actually is quite slow, and they haven't been able to meet the needs of the regulators. And so I've been in my conversations with the CLP&A over the last couple of months. Actually, what they're recommending is that you start your application process directly with them, and then work through the required documents piece with them as you go through the steps. NNAS charges a fee to gather all of the documents for you and then create a report for CLP&A. But CLP&A charges you a fee when you pay your registration fee for this service as well. And so I think the end message really is that you may be paying additional fees if you use NNAS that aren't necessary. So before you actually embark on using NNAS, I would encourage you to contact CLP&A to see what is required of you and if you can do it without using that service. If you submit documents directly to CLP&A, you'll need to complete the educational credential assessment, usually through an approved institution. WES is one I see most often used, and the IQAS is another one. You will have to have proof of previous nursing experience. They call this an actively engaged requirement, and I believe that would include securing documents from your previous employers to submit to CLP&A for proof. And CLP&A has also adopted the jurisprudence and protecting patients from sexual misconduct modules, similar to CRNA. And then finally, your English language proficiency is the same expectations as with CRNA, including the CELBAN and the IELTS test scores if needed. Very brief there. Again, if you are not meeting requirements or there's more information required, you'll need to speak directly to CLP&A about that. And they have their contact information on the bottom of their website, as well as once you start the application process, I believe you're often connected with the registration consultant. Any questions on the registration process? I know many of you are probably going through it right now. Or Lindsay, maybe do you want me to just keep going and we do questions at the end?
Yeah, maybe let's do that at the end. We have one in the chat here, but I think they'll all be about different topics. So maybe all at the end.
Sure. Okay. I'll keep going then so we can get through everything that I have here. Okay, so in Canada, there are some unique differences for the role of the nurse, and this goes for all three disciplines of nursing. You are responsible for your practice at all times, and therefore you're required to continually reflect on and improve your knowledge and skills related to the role you're practicing in. And as I said, you know, some IENs actually hold both an LPN and an RN license, and so it's really important to be aware of the role that you're practicing in the context of the employer that you're working for at the time. Autonomy is one of the four main ethical principles in the Nursing Code of Ethics, and that is one of the biggest differences in nursing in Canada. The three ethical principles besides autonomy is beneficence. So that's the ethical principle of doing what's best for the patient while respecting their autonomy and avoiding harm. Justice is the next one, and that one emphasizes impartiality and fairness in nursing decisions and care. And then finally, non-maleficence, which is to do no harm. So nurses need autonomy to determine specific aspects of patient care without having to consult with a doctor or healthcare provider. Autonomy allows nurses to be self-motivated, to think critically, and to take distinct and direct actions related to their patient care. Autonomy in nursing is the ability of nurses to understand their patient's right to medical information and care while independently making decisions without consulting the healthcare provider. Autonomy includes properly advocating for your patient. However, you must fully understand your patient's medical wishes to do this for them. You must also have a grasp of all potential risks, benefits, and complications to make well-informed decisions. Understanding autonomy in nursing can be helpful when making decisions throughout your shift, and acting under this principle helps ensure that you're acting within the scope of your role. There's two types of autonomy in nursing. So one of them is clinical autonomy, and the other is autonomy over your practice. The clinical autonomy part relates to nurses making decisions and judgments about your patient's care. So for an example, that would be deciding to use a PRN medication for the management of pain. Autonomy over your nursing practice allows nurses to make decisions about their practice setting. So these decisions includes things regarding organizational structure, rules, policies, and operations. There's a lot of responsibility and self-direction required in nursing practice. You must be ready to work to your full scope, practice your clinical skills, and know how to read and critically think about orders and instructions. Clear communication with your patients, families, and team members is essential, and all nurses are expected to know your CRNA, CLPNA, or CRPNA standards of practice, and to understand your role in Canada and how it is unique. Okay, I won't harp on that any longer. Practice reflection. Whenever we're thinking about our scope of practice and learning needs, we need to be asking ourselves questions to determine what learning needs we have. So for example, when completing an intervention with a patient, you need to ask questions of yourself like, do I have the knowledge, skill, education, and training to perform this activity safely? Do I understand the indications and contraindications of what I am doing? And would you be able to manage any adverse events that might happen? And then finally, are there policies and procedures to support what you're doing? This is, I highlight this really because I actually had an interaction with an IEN recently looking for some education on tracheostomy care. Her employer was asking her to take care of a patient who had a tracheostomy but had not provided the education and training for her to actually do this skill in the care of her patient. And so she was looking for some supporting education to meet that need. And so it was a really good example of self-reflection and the identification of her own learning needs in order to meet the requirements of her employer. Finally, I'll just comment that you must be able to assess your patient and understand their condition, their preferences, and the risks associated. Understand the environment you work in, what the policies, expectations, and resources there are, and understand your own practice and whether you have the knowledge, skills, and ability to critically think through a scenario and make clinical judgments and decisions. For education and learning, you guys are all currently taking bridging programs, and so I applaud you for that. I think no matter how experienced you are, I've never met a student that said this was a waste of my time. So I really hope that you are enjoying your programs and getting something out of them. There's tons of other opportunities for education and professional development once you've done your bridging programs. And it is an expectation by the colleges that you do this on a regular basis. So there's some examples here, and other things that we use frequently in the academic world is executive links. They have really excellent nursing education videos, and Khan Academy, KHAN, has lots of nursing specific education embedded in it. Okay, so now you've done your education, you have your license, what are we going to do next? So it's time to look at the employment side of things. And currently the nursing job market in Alberta is extremely competitive. We have a few things working against us in the public healthcare sector, including things like negotiations with unions and a current healthcare restructuring plan by our government that is causing some challenges within the employer side of things and a bit of a decreased ability for them to actively hire and recruit into positions in the hospitals. You'll need to strategically think about creating your resume, finding positions, and preparing for the interview process. The AAN career page has an endless supply of information and resources to help you work on your resume, cover letter, interview process, and more. So you can check that out. I host webinars that are specifically focused on applying and interviewing skills, and also some of the community partners like Directions for Immigrants, Braden Works, Center for Newcomers. Those all offer lots of opportunities for resume writing and mentoring support around those things. I do have a applying and interviewing webinar planned for December 18th, but I didn't get the Zoom link created fast enough, and so I'll have to send that through Lindsay to get to you guys if you're interested in that. First thing we got to do though is look at a resume, right? Create our resume, and this is essential. A strong, error-free resume will be really important. So do the extra learning or professional development to help enhance your resume. The education piece of it really will be a highlight on your resume for you as an IEN. Not everybody is going back to school, and so it will make you stand out when you go to apply for jobs. Your resume is the first place an employer gets a picture of you, and I say picture in quotes there, and your ability to work as a nurse. So create your resume carefully, spend lots of time on this step, have people review it, and get it tidied up so that it is, something that stands out for you. There's lots of resources, like I said, so make sure you ask for help. It's important to be concise and make sure your resume is really well organized and easy to read. So make it stand out. Use a template or a sample to guide you. And there's lots of free options online that you can have a look at and download yourself. Keep it subtle though too. So you don't want to have all kinds of colors everywhere, not too many visual distractions that makes the resume unreadable or difficult to find information on. Don't include a photo of yourself. This is actually an outdated practice, and unfortunately, we've found that this can lead to discrimination. And when you upload your resumes, make sure that it is a PDF format, because formatting can change if it's not sort of preset. And then there's some other information on the slide there. You're going to need a cover letter as well, right? And when should we use a cover letter? Actually, we should always use a cover letter. The cover letter is kind of what we use to tell a little bit of a more personal story about ourselves, to highlight those qualities that will be a good fit with the organization, and a little bit more about who you are and what makes you unique. So this is the place that you talk about yourself, what makes you special. Include details about why there's gaps in your practice maybe, and why you're looking to return to the workforce now. You might describe work experience and specialty education, knowledge, or training here that makes you the person for the job. You can Google search for different templates as well, but what I would suggest is that your cover letter and your resume formats are the same. You don't want them to be too different. You want it to look the same, and you need to have your name on all pages of every piece of the document. A registered nurse's cover letter should always be in formal letterhead format. And that shouldn't be registered nurses. A nurse's cover letter should always be in formal letter format. So layout, font, colors, it should all match your resume. What do I say in a cover letter? I think I kind of touched on that already. Usually kind of the format should include a bit about yourself, an introduction to yourself in the first paragraph, including maybe some of your outstanding credentials, the school that you attended, your NCLEX status, and note that you are currently registered with CRNA. Then you're going to want to talk about why you're the right person for this position. Introduce your qualities to the nursing role, specific personal experiences, study, or specialty training. And don't be afraid to talk about yourself here. This is where you're selling yourself. In the third paragraph, you're going to talk about why the position is, particularly the one that you're actually applying for, and the facility is right for you. And you can explain why you want the job, but try to avoid sounding desperate. And I know I'm giving you like everything here, but you want to be confident and passionate about why you want that position. And then finally, in your summary, you'll thank the reader for their time and consideration. You can address the position you're applying for and how you can fulfill the characteristics, credentials, skills, knowledge, and expertise that they are requiring from you. So to do this, you're going to need to do a little research, right? You're going to need to look up the hospital and the unit you're applying to. You need to maybe understand the mission statement of the facility that you're applying to, or the core values. And you might want to mention those in your cover letter. It shows the employer actually that you're standing out, and that you know who it is you're looking to work for. Just a few do's and don'ts. So use your cover letter over and over again. You don't need to recreate it every single time, but don't forget to change the details to match the actual position you're applying to. So you'll need to go through it and maybe tailor a couple of the details there to make it specific to each posting. Make sure you proofread your documents, and make sure you have somebody else have a look at it. Different strategies you can include are reading it from the bottom to the top. Sometimes reading it backwards points out things that you don't see reading it in a normal logical fashion. I always have somebody else have a look at documents for me, and redo it, a couple of times to make sure that you have it perfect. And then you can also use your grammar and spelling checks in your programs when you're writing documents. Do use personal experiences that cannot be fully detailed in your resume, and show some personality to sell yourself. Describe how you will contribute to the workplace that you're applying to. And then finally, don't ramble or rewrite your resume. You want to make your cover letter different than the resume and to highlight things that are not covered in the resume. All right. This is the part we're working on right now. So finding employment. This has become one of the more central focus areas for my work over the last even couple of weeks. We were looking at education initially, and now we're really focusing on this employment side of things, because that is the biggest, I'm going to use the word barrier. I'm not supposed to use that word anymore, but I do feel like there's a barrier to employment right now that's much more difficult than it has been in the past. So as I said, there are some factors affecting our job market in Alberta, including the restructuring of Alberta Health Services and union negotiations of collective agreements. And we also have a large influx of newly registered nurses, yourselves, looking for employment. And so that does then make it more competitive when applying for positions. Alberta Association of Nurses webpage does actually have a career section, and so I encourage you to check that out. We're always trying to engage employers to post positions and availability on our website. But I will tell you that I am encouraging people to look beyond the hospital setting, the acute care setting, and become a little bit creative with where nurses are in our province. There are many great nursing opportunities in different facilities other than the acute care centers. We have rehabilitation centers, we have surgical centers that are in the communities, home care providers, and even corrections facilities. There's just a few of these listed here on my webpage, but it really is endless. And one unique thing we do have in Alberta as well is the emergence of more private clinics. And so things like dental clinics, dental surgical clinics, orthopedic surgical clinics, cosmetic clinics, etc. So there are some different opportunities that look different than your traditional medical surgical unit. As you guys know, the rural healthcare providers are desperate for nursing staff and might even offer relocation incentives or bonuses for joining their team. Rural health nursing is challenging, but it is a unique nursing area that I think is really exciting and really focuses a lot on the autonomy aspect of nursing practice in Canada. As more nurses become registered, the job market is getting tighter. This might mean starting in a position that isn't really in the area you want to be in. It might even look like a casual position rather than a traditional full-time job. But what you need to remember is that you need to get your foot in the door, right? So people are saying you need Canadian experience to get a job. Well, how do you get that? If you can't get hired into a position. And so sometimes what you need to kind of remember or remind yourself of is that you may need to start in something that you weren't originally planning to do. And then once you're in the door, that's where the magic happens. And that's where nursing gets really exciting because the opportunities really are endless in where you can go in nursing, from specialty areas to community health providers. And so just building on what you start with is really important to sort of keep in the back of your mind. And get creative. There's other perks to working outside of the acute care environment. No night shifts, maybe no weekends. Environments are a little more controlled, and patient care ratios aren't as big of an issue as they are in our current healthcare environment. When reviewing the available opportunities, you should consider a few things. Think about where you're applying, how you will get there. Will you have a place to stay? As you've noticed in the last couple of weeks, Alberta winters can be very difficult if you have to travel long distances, if you have to fight through snowstorms and highway closures, and definitely the cold is a difficult thing to manage. So reliability is a huge asset when marketing yourself to future employers. If you're relocating with family, think about schools, daycare, and employment for your spouse. And also think about things like community supports. And so faith-based organizations or churches, there's many nursing associations that will connect with you and your community. We have the Internationally Educated Nursing Association of Alberta, the Filipino Canadian Nursing Association, the Canadian Black Nurses Alliance, and the list goes on and on. So the networks that these organizations have are massive. And so within our increasingly diverse population, there are many groups that are being formed based on commonalities, faith, profession, culture, etc. So try to find some that connect with your values to develop your professional and personal self. And just the last thing I like to comment on is be persistent, be patient, and be creative. Thanks for joining me today, you guys. I'm going to stop sharing my slide and then we can get to some questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Holly, for the presentation and all of that information. I know it's very helpful for many, many people here today. So thank you again. As Holly mentioned, we are going to hop into a Q&A. So I just ask if you can please type your questions in to either the chat or the Q&A section in Zoom here, and I will read them out. And Holly and myself are both happy to respond depending on the nature of the question. I did put in the group chat as well our email address if you do want to personally ask RhPAP a question. We can also pass it on to Holly if you don't want to ask publicly. You're more than welcome to do that. It is bien@rhpap.ca. So we do have a few questions in here. One was around the post-secondary step, asking if citizens of Canada under the PND IEN program need to take English proficiency.
I believe one of the requirements for registration with that program is actually within the language. Usually any of the universities or colleges with their programs will have an English language proficiency requirement. Is it with Norquest College that you're speaking specifically about? I think that was the one.
Guessing that is where the question is from, yes.
See, I'm just on their webpage right now that I can actually English language proficiency requirements. Yeah, so you'll need the IELTS, the TOEFL, or the CELBAN. for testing scores in order to apply.
Just scrolling to the top so I don't miss any questions here. We also had, is there any special criteria for holding both an LPN and RN license?
That's a good question too. That's great. Yeah, so for the LPN and the RN licensure process, they are very different and have different requirements. Specifically, the education piece would be the biggest difference. So an RN obviously would be a degree in nursing from one of the countries that they assess to be equivalent. And then with LPN, generally, if you qualify for an RN license, or if you have a diploma from another country, you will still be eligible for the LPN license. You will, though, have to write the CLPNE exam in order to get that license. And then while you're waiting for the exam, you can practice under a temporary permit as an LPN. They do look very favorably on the RNs, internationally educated RNs, and that education is generally granted to the LPNs who apply. Not necessarily everyone, but for many. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, and then we had a question. Do we need to submit our English proficiency every time we renew our license, or is it a one-time requirement for registration?
Yeah, and I don't think you actually have to submit your English language proficiency at all anymore, even in the original application. It's called an attestation to that you have done the English language proficiency exams or graduated, fit into one of the subcategories for English language proficiency. And so what that means is you say, yes, I have completed this. And if they audit you and you have not done that, then you can lose your license. But you will attest you only attest once to your language proficiency, I think, on registration.
Okay, and then do you need to pass the NCLEX exam first before registering in CRNA?
No, so you have to actually be given permission from CRNA in order to write the NCLEX RN exam. So you cannot access that exam unless you've begun the CRNA process, and then they give you the permission to write the exam.
Great. Then we had one about searching for employment, saying, is there a job website where we can look for nursing jobs aside from Indeed and those types of sites? I know you mentioned the AAN website has a lot of resources there.
Yeah, people are really keen on LinkedIn. That's a big one lately. There's job banks, yeah, Indeed for sure. Those are all search engines for jobs that people are posting or employers are posting on. But the other thing you can do is actually go into the websites for different facilities. So if you even do, we used to call it a windshield scan, but if you drive around sort of your neighborhood, your area where you live, and look at what organizations offer healthcare services, you can actually look directly within those employers' web pages themselves and see if they offer jobs and if there's any opportunities there as well.
Okay. And I'll just add to that because everyone here is a BN recipient, which means you've signed a return and service agreement to go work in rural Alberta in the list of approved communities. So I would just say, keep in mind that we have made it very open in terms of your employment. So it can be a public or private provider. It can be one full-time position or multiple part-time positions. So once you figure out which rural communities you're interested in, start doing your research around the sites there. It could be home care. It could be, a nursing home facility. It could be a hospital. So there's all of these different options. And I think it really helps when you're going rural to figure out what areas you're interested in and then start reaching out proactively to those employers in those communities. And we also have resources and volunteers in many communities across rural Alberta who are on attraction and retention committees, and they would love to help put you in touch with contacts. And once you move there, they'd love to help integrate you and make sure you have access to daycares and how to sign your kids up for soccer or how to find the right worship place for yourself. So we have all of those connections to help you once you're in rural. If you just reach out to RhPAP, we can do that anytime. Next question, do hiring managers look for bridging courses? Does it give us a better chance having completing the bridging programs on our resumes?
So I cannot speak directly for hiring managers, but from my perspective, from the academic experience, I would say absolutely yes. One of the benefits of the bridging programs is that clinical opportunity that you have in the facilities around where you're taking your education. And so those clinical opportunities are your chance to show off your skills and knowledge, to really kind of put a spotlight on yourself, and amplify your position as a nurse. And so I found what we've heard in the past with clinical placements is that really it gives you access to clinical work, and exposure to those hiring managers and an opportunity to maybe actually kind of get a foot ahead of other folks, in terms of being visible and demonstrating your skills and knowledge and abilities in the clinical setting. But it does build your resume and really round it out in terms of having completed a bridging program for employers. It is attractive for sure.
Can the English course that we're taking in the bridging program be approved for English proficiency requirements?
Is that at Kayano College or Norquest College?
I'm guessing Norquest because they're a part of the BN program.
Yeah, because some of the programs actually have a university level or college level English language course embedded in their programs. And so that would be acceptable.
And there is a longer question here. I can read it out loud if you'd like. And this might be a better one for offline if it's about a very specific scenario, but they talk about being an RN back home in Ethiopia, and they are in an LPN bridging course here, but want to challenge the NCLEX exam. It looks like there's some nuance around their bachelor degrees does not say RN from back home. It says public health officer. But when you look up, it seems to be equivalent. So they're wondering if that affects their acceptance.
Yeah, so that would be a question that you would specifically need to send to CRNA, the College of Registered Nurses of Alberta. I don't believe anyone is allowed to challenge the NCLEX exam. You've either written it or you haven't. And if you have not written the NCLEX RN exam, you will be required to write it. So just because you have a degree in nursing from another country does not exempt you from the NCLEX national exam. But I would contact CRNA to find out about that specific situation.
Okay. And then I just put a link in the chat if everyone can take a look at that. There were a few questions around specific communities and whether or not they are eligible as rural for the BN program return in service. One was Devon. Devon is not on the approved rural community list. The other that was mentioned is Grand Prairie, which is included in the list. Please be reminded in your return and service agreements for BN, you have that full list of eligible communities. It is also on our website at rpap.ca/BN. And if you ever lose track of it or you don't know where to find it, please email us and we can send it to you. It lists an extensive list of communities, but it has to be on that list in order for your return and service to be eligible. So I have linked that in the chat, but please check if you're curious. There's another direct message asking if you need NNAS to register in CRNA in order to take the NCLEX exam.
No, so with CRNA, you would apply directly to CRNA. They've actually found that the delays in the NNAS process has caused some problems, and some of the information they're getting from NNAS has not been accurate. I'm going to use that word, I think. And so they've had some struggles with it recently, and they are asking that you start the process directly with CRNA, and then I think WES and IQAS are the two most popular education credentialing programs that they're using to get those documents. I just wanted to go back. LB had asked that question about LPN and RN special criteria for holding both of those licenses. Really, I don't know if I answered the question. I talked about the licensing piece itself, but in terms of working as an LPN and an RN, you need to be sure that where you're working in that role, you're very comfortable with the role expectations for that position. So an RN would have more leadership, more critical thinking and autonomy, and possibly a broader scope of practice, really, than an LPN. And so what you want to be careful of is that you're actually practicing to your full scope as an RN in the RN position, and that when you're working in the LPN position, that you're actually practicing within the confines of an LPN scope of practice. And so not then participating in RN activities while working as an LPN. And that's very vague in my answer, but it's really important to understand the differences between the two roles.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have one more here for you, Holly, and then there's a quick one for me, and I'll be mindful of everyone's time. We'll try to wrap up right around 2 here. One last question for you says, the Bridge to Canadian program includes an English course titled English 102, emphasizing writing and argumentation. Can we utilize this as evidence of our language skills in lieu of taking the IELTS, among other assessments?
Right. That would be actually a question you should direct specifically to the regulator. They may give you credit for that, and then, remove that from the list of things you need to do. But they could also ask you to still have an IELTS or CELBAN test score in your application. So you'd have to ask them directly, either whatever regulator you're applying to for that clarification.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's one more in here just asking when you can start the return in service term after you complete your program. I'm happy to answer that on behalf of RhPAP. So when you graduate, and this is very important, this is in your return in service agreement. So please, if you're not familiar with the terms of your agreement, go back and read it over. You have a 6-month window once you graduate to secure your license and secure rural employment. So from the time of graduation, you have 6 months and you have to get your license and confirm to us where you will be working rurally. You can do that with a letter from your employer as long as you have a highlighted start date showing you are hired, this is the position and the hours you'll be working. That's the proof that we ask for. So you have 6 months to get that done. And if you don't confirm employment within 6 months, that does lead to a default scenario. I'm going to read the bottom one first. Can you work as an LPN if you're an RN?
Yes. Yep, you can work as an RN if you're licensed as an RN. You can work as an LPN if you're licensed as an LPN, and you can work either role. You cannot work without the license though. So you must hold a valid work license from that registrar in order to work in that role.
And there was one more specific, I've asked them to email us directly. So please email bn@rpap.ca. They're asking about their specific term. They're hired as an RN in Viking, but also taking the bridging program and how that counts towards their return in service. So just send me an email and I can personally get back to you and we can look at your scenario specifically. No problem. I think, Holly, thank you for answering so many questions. Super helpful.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. It was really nice to be able to speak with you. And if you need anything from me support-wise, feel free to email me. I did put my email in the chat box there. And if you look at AAN online, you'll find me under the IEN resources.